Welcome to the Sisters in Crime Writers Podcast. Everyone has a unique writing journey, so join us for conversations about those journeys from the writers themselves. Hi, this is Julie Henriquez, the Executive Director of Sisters in Crime, and I'm honored to have Tracee de Hahn as a podcast guest this week. Tracee is a writer, lecturer, and educator. Born in Cape Girardeau, Mississippi, she grew up in Kentucky. She now lives in Virginia. A member of Mystery Writers of America and International Thriller Writers, she served as president of the National Board of Sisters in Crime from 2024 to 2025. Prior to writing fiction, she began her career in the practice of architecture, using the need to see great buildings as an excuse to travel. After several years in Switzerland and receiving an advanced degree in European history, she turned her hand to the nonprofit world, eventually running alumni relations for a West Coast university. These experiences have served as inspiration for her talks on career change and achieving impossible goals. Her mysteries set in Switzerland were inspired by her years living in Lausanne. Currently, she's at work on a historical novel set during the World Wars. She frequently teaches webinars and workshops on various aspects of writing and publishing. She also serves as a writing mentor for the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning in Lexington, Kentucky, working one-on-one with authors to identify and achieve their goals. Tracee, you've been on the podcast before, but welcome back because we have a lot to talk about.
Well, thank you for having me. And we do have a lot to talk about because we are wrapping up a great year together.
We are. As we're recording this, it's right before the board turnover, which for Sisters in Crime happens on October 1st. Used to happen at BoucherCon, but fortunately that changed a few years ago because some people had 9-month terms, some people had 15-month terms. So it's now on October 1st. So the new board, we're doing orientations, we're getting them ready to go. But not only is this the end of your presidency, this is the 6th year you've been on the board. As immediate past president, you will serve for another year. So usually board members only serve for 5, but you got into the president's pipeline later. So 7 years of service on the national board is no small feat, and it is so appreciated.
Well, I've enjoyed it. And every time we say the word national now, I have a little stop. And we've not changed our name, as you know. We're still Sisters in Crime. That is our name. But we do call ourselves the National Board. It's now the Worldwide Board. And we did that because we have so many members all over the world. And when we were doing our events, people were coming in from all over the world. We have members on the board who are from all over the world. And so I have to start thinking worldwide. And there's something about it that sounds like too big. You know what I'm saying? I think when you say the Worldwide Board, it sounds like we're some sort of superheroes or supervillains in a, Bond movie, but it represents who we are. And we have to just acknowledge that. So it's been a great pleasure to be on the board the year we said, yes, we are absolutely worldwide and we should just put it out there.
Yes, and I will say as an organization, we tend more towards the superheroes than the supervillains, for sure. But just as a reminder, we let our membership know about this, but 7% of our members live outside of the United States, in over 20 countries. We have members, I think, in 14 or 15 time zones at this point. So we really notice that during write-ins where people, depending on the time of day, you'll get people from 6 different countries coming in and doing one of the write-ins. And you're a big part of the write-in community, so you know this even better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, we have people from Australia coming on. I think that's 12 hours off maybe 15 hours off where I am on the East Coast. But our recent board meeting, we had someone from every time zone in the United States, except for Hawaii and the further out in Alaska. So from Pacific all the way over, and then into the UK and EU, just on that one meeting. So,
so you're right. I will count time zones, but we're
a lot.
Yeah, we have a lot. And the organization continues to grow. As we're recording this, we're looking at moving into our 40th year. In 1986, the organization was a discussion. And in 1987, it was a formal organization with Sarah Paretsky as the president. But during the discussion year, they had Dorothy Salisbury Davis ran the committee that oversaw, talks about what to do. And the group included obviously writers, but also librarians and booksellers and critics and readers. It's always been an advocacy organization, always been about supporting the genre and supporting women crime writers, now an expanded mission to other underrepresented crime writers. But it's supporting everybody. So it's everyone in the genre. So,
Julie, I'll jump right in though and say it was such an honor for me to meet Sarah Paretsky this year. That was kind of a little bonus thing that it just happened. And you were there also, and you had met Sarah before, but when she was the keynote speaker at Left Coast Crime, and I got to spend time with her and think about, what were the goals? What was the mission of advocacy when they started the organization? And I was so proud that we've continued that advocacy, focusing on, equal rights for women in publishing, but that we have felt enough success to reach a hand out and say, who else is marginalized? We were marginalized. We are still often marginalized, but we're doing that work. And we don't want to be the ones that say, well, we've achieved something and we don't care about anybody else. And I think that is how advocacy continues and grows and really resonates. It does not leave behind the original mission, but the mission is big enough. And the world is big enough. We talk about this, that, it's like love. It's not like pie. There's not just slices. That we want everyone to rise up. We want a truly diverse writing community, reading community. And so it's been wonderful to be part of that. And then you mentioned we are crime fiction, whether that's nonfiction or fiction. We're a crime writing organization. But I do think that we live in a world where writing has changed a little bit. We see cross-genre a lot more. I think you would agree with me. And that we as a membership reflect that. So you might be a romance writer and you're like, well, I got some crime in my romance, bad things happen, and put these people in tension with one another. Or you think, well, I really write YA, but maybe I want to look at crime fiction. And even if you don't specifically make the move to crime fiction, we feel that we're a writing community about our advocacy and about craft. And so we have a lot of room for people who just want to join a writing community and find really what we are about, which is community. And that is friendship, that is educating one another, that's education that we provide in terms of our webinars, that is bringing people together in their own community through our chapters. And so I just have loved being part of this organization, which has very broad open arms.
And when we were talking about the resources and how in the last few years we've really been about making these resources more accessible, figuring out how technology can help us with resources. Happily for Sisters in Crime, they'd started to do online webinars before the pandemic. So we had it down and had already gotten membership used to come watch this webinar, which we continue. We do at least 24 webinars a year, and they're all available to members in the archives. And when you talk about the open arms, I think it's also because of the programming we do, with very few exceptions, are for writers at any stage of their career, and also for all kinds of writers. We do have specific webinars on police procedures or poisons or things like that. But we also, writing is writing. And let's talk a little bit about that, because you and I both are teachers at heart. But you've lectured, you're a mentor with the Carnegie Institute. Let's let's talk about that writing journey, both for ourselves and also what the teaching aspects and why it's so important to provide resources for people, no matter where they are on their journey, to help support them, because you don't finish learning.
No. And that's, for me, one of the interesting things about helping others on their writing journey is every single person starts from a different place. I guarantee that, because maybe they're a huge reader and they have a story and they want to be a writer now. And they could be 12 years old or 58 years old. It does not matter. Some people have always felt that they wanted to be a writer, but they're trying to define what do they want to write. Maybe they're testing genre. Maybe they've written essays and, personal essays or things like that. And they're like, no, I have the goal of writing fiction. So maybe their writing skills, they feel that they're very honed. So for me, when I first meet with any individual, and usually I do classes, but that's a little bit different because, as you know, it's kind of like, and this is the program for the class folks. Everybody's got to find their way into it. But when I do the one-on-one, I'm always amazed at how someone has had in a way, the bravery to say, I'm going to put myself out there, even just talking to me. I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to plant a stake in the ground and say, I want to be a writer. And that is a huge deal. And I think we like to celebrate that someone says, I want to be a writer. Okay. And we always say, I think we've fallen into a new way of speaking. Instead of saying, oh, I'm not published, that you're pre-published. You're on your path to bidding. It's not like the not is a negative, which, is such kind of a negative. I'm not published. You're just pre-published that you can get there. You just have to kind of define the steps in your personal journey. And for me, it's a lot of fun to work with people and say, what is your path going to be? It will be a little bit unique from everybody else's.
Well, you and I also talk about, though, in defining that path, of being open to criticism and getting support from mentors and realizing that you're developing a skill, a craft, and that requires apprenticeship, which means usually writing a book or two that may not get published, or just your first book may be just to figure out how to write a book, but you need to move on and start writing other things as well. And to develop the wherewithal to acknowledge this isn't ready, or I'm not ready with this piece, or I've been working on getting this book out there too long and I need to move on to something else.
Well, and the book may have missed its time. It may have missed its moment in the readership world. It may be that the freshness is gone. I think, sometimes authors will say, I think Stephen King is someone who said this, that he can only spend a certain number of months writing a book because he feels that that's when he has the zest for the writing, the true spirit of the character and of the plot. Now, he may spend a lot more time doing some editing, but he's like, I got to get it down on the page because otherwise it loses its specialness. I think for me, we started the Read Like a Writer, I think last year for Sisters in Crime, which was reading like a writer. I mean, yes, that's exactly what it is, because you have to learn how to turn off the reader part and be a writer. And it's also very easy when we read our own work, we know all the love that went into it. We know the intention that went into it. So when you read your own manuscript, you're reading your own work. You're not reading like an outside reader, if that makes sense. It's not explained that well, but I think that's one of the hardest things to learn, that it is your baby when you put it down on the page, and you have to develop both your own skills to evaluate it independently, but you also have to develop that all-important beta reader group, which is tough, because that's not something that just gets handed to you on a platter. I think that's one of the big questions we probably get, like, how do I get a beta group together for doing that important round of reading? They have to be people who are widely read in the genre. I'm not saying that somebody outside the genre can't read it and give great feedback, but every genre has expectation. Literary fiction has certain expectation. This is not genre as a kind of, oh, it's romance genre, thriller genre, whatever. Everything is a genre. And what is that? What is the contract or compact with the reader? When I sit down to read that book, do I expect a happily ever after? Do I expect the villain to go to prison? Do I expect the world's problems to be brought to me in a philosophical way? you know what you think, and so you need readers who understand that and can give you that direct feedback. It's a whole process, isn't it? I mean, it's skills, it's the outside community that helps you take this internal project to the greater world. It's, I think, more complex. The journey, I think, is more complex than many readers understand, and that's part of making that transition from reader to writer.
Yeah, one of the great joys of this podcast is that I get to talk to so many people about writing and realize that nobody has, there's no one way to do it. But one of the things that I hear over and over again is that you do need to understand the tropes of the genre. And by tropes, I'm not saying, that's not a negative thing. It's like, these are the reader's expectations. And you can twist and turn, but really breaking the rules, do it at your peril. And make sure you do it really, really well.
With intention. You want to do it with intention and not by accident.
And sometimes people will break the tropes. I'm using air quotes for folks who are listening to us. And then that becomes a trope. Mm-hmm. The unreliable narrator all of a sudden becomes, everyone's writing it because Gone Girl did such a good job with it. Well, that then you have to understand why Gone Girl worked and read that over and over again till you can say, this is how they did that.
Yeah. And I find that when I'm talking to people about their work, reading their drafts and setting up some, not guidelines, but some suggestions to, help people move forward, get that all important first draft on the page, not to have multiple points, not to have too many multiple points of view. Multiple points of view is fine. And so someone will say, well, how many is it? How many is okay? And then you find yourself having to say things as if they're definitive. Mm-hmm. But like you just said about a trope. So I'll say, well, 5 is a lot. Like, that's a lot. And I think a publisher might say, that's the limit, and then I'll also say, oh, no, don't shift point of view within your paragraph, within your chapter, whatever. And then I have to say, unless, of course, you're Larry McMurtry writing Lonesome Dove and you'll win a Pulitzer, and it is one of my favorite books ever. So right. We all know that we are giving advice and trying to take our own advice about these rules, yet someone who is a master knows the rule, right, but then breaks it and does it in such a way that you don't even notice that they've changed points of view because it is so elegant and so necessary. So I think that's the other hard thing, as with learning anything. You're learning how to drive a car, don't floor it. Well, unless you realize the guy behind you is literally about to rear end you, then you floor it. So you can't give all the exceptions when you're trying to help someone learn how to write. And so that's where all but there's an exception, but you have to use the exception intentionally.
I think one of the things I love most about writers is that every book they write, they add a challenge. So that, I've written a cozy, so I'm just going to write another cozy. It's like, no, how am I going to make this harder on myself? How am I going to complicate the plot? How am I going to do whatever? How am I going to address the situation? Larry McMurtry, Lonesome Dove wasn't his first book.
It was not.
So he had to learn how to write well enough that he could write Lonesome Dove. And I think that patience, and I think that's why so many people give up when writing is their dream, is that they're not writing Larry McMurtry. They're not writing the Thursday Murder Club. They're not writing Sarah Paretsky from the outset. It's like, no, because they took time to be able to write like that. Thursday Murder Club isn't a great example because that was his first book, but he had been a TV writer and he understood cadence and everything else.
Yeah. Well, and I think you could say that about Lee Child, that he was working in television, he understood story. And so he took that skill, which storytelling skill related very directly. And when you hear him talk about how he came up with who his character should be, where the story should be set, you realize this was incredibly intentional, based on real knowledge coming out of TV storytelling. This is not just, hey, I've read a bunch of stuff, but like really work-related intentional knowledge. And I think that's what we're saying. The more you know, and you can use it intentionally. Larry McMurtry. See, I'm gonna have to reread Lonesome Dove right away, But you're right. And what I find interesting, we've all been at conferences, and I mentioned conferences because people can be talking in person, but it could be on, and maybe it just comes up in person a little bit more easily. But I've definitely been with people who are the big headliner, their book is getting a big to do, whatever, and people are saying, oh my gosh, you're just an instant bestseller. And they're like sitting beside you on the panel going, this is my 12th published book. Like, why is everybody always saying, making the one that maybe got them to the national, international audience as if it was their first? Like, it makes it more exciting for the reader or the purchaser. And they're like, well, technically I've been doing this for a long time. This is the result of the process of my labors.
Yes.
Which is great. You want that book to be celebrated, but it's a little bit sad because it does mislead people thinking into they have to write the and many people have written many full manuscripts that are fully developed and they've gone in the drawer. And so maybe it is their first published book, but it is their 6th, their 12th, their 20th, definitely their 3rd book that they decided was good enough to send into the world or found a place in the world.
And I think one of the exciting things for writers is that you are going to get better so that, you may have that idea and you just don't know how to execute it right now. But if you write enough and you write a lot, you'll get there. You'll be able to execute the idea the way you want to.
So I've talked about this with several people. And so I think it's not just an idea that I've kind of had or thought about, but others, that you've either had an idea that never got fully written, or you have a draft that you knew wasn't really great enough, or maybe it got turned down or whatever. And you pick it up years later, and you say, that's still a great idea. And I think too often people take that early work and they just edit it, like check the spelling and, whatever, instead of saying, what is the core of this great idea? And is the way it was delivered still how I would do it if I started fresh today?
Yes.
And someone, and I'm not going to mention who it is, but they had a book come out that was quite successful. And they said it was really the same book that they had written 10 years before. And what they did was they went back to that original book, they read it, and they were like, yeah, I still love this idea. And then they put it aside and they thought about that idea. And then they sat down and started to write it fresh so that they weren't just like massaging that favorite scene that really needed to be thrown out, but they were coming to the project with more maturity. And they said, I don't know if they ever went back and compared the two, but they said that was much better than just this. And that's what we're talking about. Sometimes you do have to put it aside because it just gets so grindingly edited that all the zip is taken out.
Yes. And you mentioned beta readers and, and the importance and how people ask about them. This is the same for critique groups. This is the same for agents. This is the same for everything in this industry. You got to find the people who are good for you to work with.
Yes.
Right. So for beta readers, as you said, you need people who've read widely, but they also are going to give you the feedback that's helpful. They're not going to tell you how to write the book because how they would write the book. They're going to say, I didn't understand this character, or this was boring. These 3 chapters were boring. Why are they there? And you've got to be able to take that. You have to, when you're finding an agent, you're looking for a business partner. So you need to have somebody who you are going to grow your career and they're going to be your business partner in there. And as we talked to so many people who changed agents at a point in their career because they're making other decisions.
Yeah. And I think the thing about a beta reader that you mentioned is critical because a beta reader is not there to rewrite the book for you. So you don't, you don't want somebody who wants to rewrite the book for you. You don't want them to be like, oh, and I will, is exactly what to do. You want someone who says, I don't understand why this character is here, or I don't understand why this character made these decisions, or this part was boring, or you told me it was a cozy, yet, there's graphic violence. Every once in a while, I'll run across someone who thinks they're writing a certain type of book. And when you really talk to them about it, they're not writing that book. And this is important. They should write whatever book they want. But like you said, there are some rules. We want to know where the book goes on the bookshelf, because whether you're selling your books at a major international bookstore, at an independent bookstore, or you're selling them through Amazon or any other online place, they get categorized so someone can find your book. You do not want your, hardcore thriller novel to be put right next to Agatha Christie, because you may be looking at two different types of readers. You're going to get crossover, but they know what they're looking for that day. So if you think you're writing a cozy, but you're putting a lot of graphic violence or sex in, you need to say, wait a minute, I don't understand, and to educate yourself about where your book should be going. It's interesting, though, when I work with individuals, I think beta reading is you're going to give me your book and you're going to say, this is what my book is. It's a thriller. It's also a sci-fi novel. And I'm like, okay, that's what they think it is. And I'm going to go into it saying, this is their vision. And I'm going to give you that feedback. This doesn't work. I love this part. You always want to hear what people love so you don't accidentally edit it out. Like, oh, I got that part. But when I'm working with a writer as a mentor, that's different. And I think there's an important difference. Beta reading is usually a chapter or a half of a book or a full book. Let me give you my top level notes on this. If you want to talk about it more, we can. When I'm reading with someone I'm mentoring, I always tell them, I hope you have a strong group of supporters who are your cheerleaders and say, keep at it and set that time to write, make time for yourself to write. I'm here to be a real critique partner.
Yeah.
And I'm here to say, and I'm also here to say, here are some examples of what I might do. Do not necessarily take this example, but I want to be sure that you are super clear on why it doesn't work for me. I am providing some specific advice, not that you need to do it my way. I think beta reading is a little bit, and different editors, publishing houses are different. But when somebody gives me feedback on a book, I always say, what are they really trying to say here? Because when we give advice, we fall into sometimes the trap of thinking, well, I need to give an example of how to make it better, or I need to, and your job as the actual author of that book is to say, well, Julie said she didn't like that the character was just like, why are they in the book? Or, and I have to say, what is she really saying here? Because I'm the one who decides how to fix it. Is it that the character should not be in the book? Is it that the character is not interesting, but they do play a role? Is it that I need to combine characters? So we take that advice, and then we have to take it seriously, and then look behind the screen and say, how am I going to incorporate that in the book that is mine?
Yes. And again, as a writer, you need to choose your mentors and choose, your readers carefully. But a mentor who gives you that tough love is absolutely critical. And you, as a writer, you do need to remove yourself, your ego, from this and just say, I agree with this, or I don't agree with this, or this may be a point, or whatever, but you need to be willing to accept feedback.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
It is. And it's funny because I know what my greatest reading channels are. Like, I'm not going to say them here, but the kinds of books that I read the most of. And then I work with people who don't necessarily write in that lane. So I do try to read widely.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's funny, someone, was asking about, they had a question. It could be a short-term mentoring situation or a very long-term one. But they were talking about a genre. And I caught myself saying, I said, well, I've never written in that genre. And, it's not necessarily a primary reading genre. And then we kept talking. And I thought, as a writer, I probably read so many more books than the average reader, because I think writers have to keep reading.
Yes.
So this woman was talking about the books. I said, what are the books that you are looking up to as examples? And she listed those. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've read those. I mean, I am trying to read widely and trying to read the books that are making the most impact on the market and the readership. So I know what's going on, especially as we talk about cross genres and things. So So I think that, I guess my point is here that as a writer, be a reader and read outside your genre, because you're going to learn things from other genres, and you're going to find that it resonates with you. Even if you're not reading what you would think of as extensively, you're like, well, wait a minute, I do know those. These are the ones that are changing the market. And maybe that change in romance or fantasy or YA is going to bleed over into something that I'm writing. So you want to be aware.
Yeah, I don't know if you've found this. Sometimes when I talk to people, if I'm teaching class or having conversations, and you ask them for comps or what genre they write in, comps or comparable titles, they can't give them. And while it's really hard to come up with them, again, this is how this is how you frame a conversation with an editor or with an agent or anyone else. It's like these books, or adjusted according to who you're talking about or how you're trying to position the book. It also helps everyone know that you understand the genre.
Well, so I was a reader for a big mystery competition one year, and I had to read hundreds and hundreds of books, and I got a hint of what it was like to be an editor or an agent. So many things thrown at you, and they were all supposed to be mysteries of some broad piece of the genre. But I needed to know, what is this writer trying to accomplish? And so if I read the back of the book, which would be kind of the setting up, the blurb would be your comps. It would say, cozy mystery where the ghost cat solves other crime. I'm like, okay, now I'm all in on what they're trying to accomplish. And I could pick up the next book and it would say, horrifying serial killer who is related to Hannibal Lecter. I'm like, okay, I'm all in on this. And the comps are that. So when you're talking to, as you said, an agent or an editor, or even a beta reader group, you say, my book is, essentially new, but similar to, and their mind goes, okay, I get it.
Yes.
And of course, the hard thing is when you're doing your own comps, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, which are the best ones? It is a hard thing, but it deserves the attention. And you really need those new ones, right? Because unless you're saying this is a modern version of Jane Austen, and then this is, what is it? Clueless is, Jane Austen, except Beverly Hills. You're like, I get it.
Yeah.
Jane Austen, Beverly Hills, I totally get the flavor of that book. I'm with you now. Or I say that's not for me, but it helps you make that decision.
Yes.
And that's the reason we can't, unless it's so specific and brought to the modern world, just use our favorite books, because sometimes they're not reflecting what readers are reading now. I mean,
yes. And readers are reading so many mashups now.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to talk some more about Sync as, your presidency's winding down, but I want to talk a little bit more about you as a writer. So one of the privileges I have as the executive director is to work closely with board members and to talk to them and have regular meetings. And you're working in historical now. And, every book I think has some elements of mystery in it, but it is historical. It is not a mystery. Tell me about that.
So it is a book that I've had in my mind for a long time, and writer friends of mine, when I really said this is my primary project at the moment, they're like, thank goodness, because you've been saying this is a book you wanted to write. And it's possible that I felt I didn't have the skills to write it. I think one of the things about and also, again, the problem is you always look to what are the historicals that you love. And if you say, well, I love War and Peace and I love Lonesome Dove, like you're setting yourself up for some disservice in terms of your own writing. So a little bit of it is overcoming that hurdle. My graduate work was in history, and you have to focus on a couple of different specifics, timeframes and places. One of my two major were Russia. Not modern Russia, but Russian Empire. So I had a good background. One of my others was just kind of general Europe and all this. So I had a good actual historical background for what I was going to write. And so then you come face to face with taking the story you want to write, the fictional story, and weaving that in with the major moments of the day. So adding to that complication, and again, it is completely fiction, but my love of that part of the world and my interest in that part of the world and some of the conflict and some of the things that people faced on a very personal level. My husband's family, my husband's father's family was from that part of the world. And so I got to know some of their stories that, kind of the authentic, that's basically first person research, right? I just had access to documents and letters and things like that. It is in no way based on his family, but I got to add that level of first person historical research. I tell you what, though, the biggest problem for me with writing historicals is that I'm pretty good at avoiding the rabbit hole because I feel like I knew enough that I wasn't like, oh, I don't know anything. I have to go down the rabbit hole of research. But in writing the story and then also making sure that you are being as respectful as possible and the integrity of the time period. I'm not talking about what they're wearing and all that, which you can do the research and make sure it's right, but how they were feeling and how they reacted to things. And every once in a while, I will just I'm an overwhelmed day. You're like, I need to step away from this because I'm becoming almost frozen over, does everything truly link up in the right way? That is the historical way and the framework and all this with my characters. And you don't run into that in the exact same way writing a non-historical, let's say a mystery, because there you're looking at, does the plot match up? And does the science match up if you're writing something that depends on, fingerprints or whatever, but it is your story. And you can always say, I don't know, just make it 2 months later. Right. Needed time to worry about that. Or you can literally, you have to take a step back sometimes, I think, as a writer and go, why am I struggling with this plot point? Change the plot. Like, you made that up. It is fiction. And maybe you've created a plot point in your book that is not working for you. And maybe you've created a character that's married or not married or, has a dog or has 12 siblings. And maybe you're like, oh my gosh, I'm juggling too many things. Well, then get rid of the siblings or add a sibling. You have total control over that. You're writing a book and you say, so anyway, all those things are in your control. When you're writing historical fiction, you do sometimes say, well, wait a minute, this is literally what was happened. And this happened on that exact date. Do my people get to that point on that exact world-changing, earth-shattering date at the right moment? Did they get, and then double checking that stuff where I'm like, did that really happen at midnight that day? And I'm just going to, as an aside, say the Russian Empire, they changed their calendar. They moved it ahead, about 2 weeks at some point in the early days of the Soviet Union. And so I'm constantly looking at these letters that talk about what happened to people and saying, was that old style? Was that new style? Like, is everybody talking? And so that's when every once in a while I just throw up my hands and say, I need to take a break because there's some real minutia. There's some real fine tuning. So anyway, but I've loved writing historical fiction. History repeats itself. It has always. And I love that we can take things that are set back in history. We know the outcome. If you know anything about history, you know in general how it worked out. And you look at how people couldn't see the end, right? And that's another thing about a mystery or even traditional romance. I don't care what these two people, the two protagonists, the main characters of the romance, I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're both aliens. I don't care their ages. They're going to end up together. That was the contract with the reader. And so you knew that whatever the mashup was, it's going to be happily ever after. I mean, HOA, right? Is that HEA, whatever, but right. Happily ever after. And so there was a contract. In a mystery, typically you're going to catch the criminal and there's going to be justice in the end. And that's what you get. You get that sense of satisfaction of justice will be served. When you read historical fiction, you're probably interested enough to know in general how things turn out for the world. And so we're understanding both the past and the present and the future through the lens of people. And you need that right mix of, you want to shake the characters and say, oh my gosh, or you feel sorry for the characters. You should have done this then, which is also a reflection of how we feel in everyday life, right? Everything is that we don't know the end. And so that's one of the things I like about writing a historical. Plus you get to go see places and say, oh, see it through the views of, I'm going to write a story about this place. I'm going to write about these characters.
Well, I've said it on this podcast before, and I'm sure I'll say it again. There are a couple of ideas that I have with historical figures, and I will never write a historical because I'd never say never, but the amount of work it takes for that accuracy and for that understanding that you're telling a story from a point of view, not a modern point of view, so that how a character reacts, they're of their time. And there might be some people who were more, there have been feminists throughout history. So you can have a feminist person in a Jane Austen novel, but they're also of their time. So what that means is going to be of that time. And that's a tough thing.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and that's where I love having the real first person accounts, and especially, for example, Henry's grandparents, my husband's grandparents, because I don't only have one document that gives their first person account of the First World War, but we have other letters and things that I can get a sense of their full character, not just what they put in that one document.
Right.
And things that are important for people to record. So the things that I know about, for example, his grandmother's life that don't show up in her actual, this is a history of my life during this time period, because she knew who was reading it. So they wouldn't need to know certain things.
Right.
They know that. So what do you self-edit? Not in a sense of hiding things, but I don't need to tell you that because you know it, and I'm going to write the other things. And so it's always putting together a full fabric. And if you read this, you might think, well, she must not have cared about her children very much because she doesn't even, I don't even know if she mentions their names in a 75-page, very closely typed document, unless you got the top page of it, which was for my children.
Yeah.
So she's writing it for them. They don't need to hear their names in it. They don't need to be told about themselves. And so it's always, I think, when we're looking back at historical figures, understand that they're always being presented through a lens. They're presenting themselves through a lens, and they knew what people would know and what people wouldn't know.
Right.
The part of the fun is also looking at the historical figures who were pivotal in certain moments, like in, Kerensky was a major figure as the Russian Empire was falling apart. He was a leader for a very short period of time. He was both very progressive, but then also conservative, I guess, in the end, because he was, smuggled out in the back of a car, and then went on to, teach in Chicago for the next 40 years. And so I'm always fascinated by those people who had that moment in this distant history and then escaped, because many of those people died in the end, and lived out this kind of normal life somewhere like America. I mean, Stalin's daughter lived in Michigan the rest of her life. You're like, wow, that's a heavy burden to carry. And it also reminds me of the secret part of people's lives, the neighbors that we think we know well, and they were the high school teacher or the whatever, and we don't really know their full life. We never can know somebody's full life, and maybe what they left behind, maybe what their parents endured, maybe what they've seen that they truly want to leave behind, because they've actually seen something that they would like to forget, and they want to have this normalcy. And so for me, looking at the historical figures is always, even if they're not included, is a reminder of how people's lives are compartmentalized.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So let's talk about Sisters in Crime and, your year as president, but also, this is a moment in the organization's history, as they all are. We just talked about history. And I actually, in the podcast, wish I'd done this before, but we will be doing an interview next week with the incoming president, Raquel Reyes, so that we can just sort of put a pin in this moment and talk about the organization right now. So at our board meeting last weekend, your last board meeting as president, you did a wonderful recap of everything we've done. And we don't need to talk about all of that. We will likely be sharing it in a blog post for Sisters in Crime. But we could talk about some of the highlights and some of the things that you're most proud of having done as president. Why don't we talk about that?
Well, I'll start off first as a credit to the board, that when I did take a glance back through the year, I just, wanted to look back at what we'd accomplished. Part of it was like, what do we need to wrap up? What do we need to continue? And I realized that everything will continue. And that's the wonder of it all. But that things don't fall into discrete buckets because there's so much overlap in everything that is done by the organization. And I think that's one of its strengths, that we do things to support members, but that may be an educational program. We do things to support, education, which also is a write-in where, what are you learning? Well, you're learning to maybe discuss in the chat your own writing. But if I had to talk about the things that I am most proud of that the board has done this year, please don't laugh at me. It's the communications plan, because I think when you have an organization that wants to do a lot of things, it helps if we have a central document where we can say every month is a kind of a target that we know what is our priority that month. And it's not prescriptive that everything has to fit that, but it helps us come together and be more strategic in how we help our members understand the world of writing. The other thing that I'm very proud of, and we've touched upon this, it's not that we use the word worldwide now, but I'm very proud of the fact that we are being very thoughtful about how we incorporate our non-American members or our North American continent members, which was very centric for us, both Canada and the United States, but that we are saying this is a worldwide organization and that we have members that we value equally across the globe, and that we are being more thoughtful in how that we make sure that they are included, whether it's by hosting events that all of our things, as you know, go into a library and watch it on your own, but by making the live version available to as many people as possible, to the write-ins being available. So I think it's how we communicate, both with our members and providing them with things, and also how we communicate them and acknowledging them around the world. And then the final thing, which technically should be the thing I'm most proud of, and it is, but I left it to last, is our ongoing advocacy. Because part of what making good writers is about making writers aware of the world around them. Just like when we talk about historical fiction, what is the world around those characters? We as writers live in our own modern world, and we want to continue to be advocates. And so I'm proud of the partnerships we've done with other organizations, ongoing work that Sisters in Crime does. And it's really done so that everyone who is a reader or a writer continues to have access to both be a reader and a writer, have the tools available to be published, have the books available to be read, get to make our own decisions about what those topics are that we read or write. And then, of course, as part of that advocacy is how is AI being used? We know that AI is here to stay. I'm not Luddite in saying that it should go away, but it needs to be done thoughtfully to address people's rights, and also to be a tool that helps humanity and doesn't strip away values or things that people should find in their daily lives. So I think those are the three things, that our communication, but also our advocacy work as the top.
Well, I love that you brought up the advocacy work. I love it all. I mean, the communication plan has been ongoing and work on, but I feel like it started to be used a lot this year and is a tool ongoing. It's, it's going to keep moving. Advocacy is also a strength of Sisters in Crime in that we don't take it for granted. Mm-hmm. We think of this in intersectional lens. We recognize that there have been times where we're not thinking of other people or that there's another organization that may also fill a need, and that it's not competition, but it's actually supplemental. And right now I'm thinking about queer crime writers and crime writers of color are not, I want everyone to know about these two organizations. I want readers to know so that they can find new books to read. And I want writers who identify as either a queer crime writer or crime writer of color to know to join those two organizations, because they can get additional support for what is a really tough journey of being a writer. It's joyful, but it's not easy. And advocacy is also standing and saying sometimes, we could have done this better, and let us tell you how we could have done this better. And we're going to try and do better in the future.
Yeah. And don't you think it's related to being a writer, where you write that book and you might read the finished book and say, If I was going to write that book again now, I would do a little bit better. And I swear that book could have won a Pulitzer Prize. And you'd say, but if I wrote it again, I would change that character, I'd change that chapter, I'd change that ending. And I think we try to do that. Maybe that comes out of being writers, that you say, oh, we could do this better next time. We could get out there earlier. We could have a different message. We could clarify. This brings up one of the topics that I have found has been, on panels at conferences over the last couple of years, talking about diversity and talking about writing authentically and authentic voices. And I think it can be very confusing for people because someone will say, but, men have always written as women, women has written in the voice of a character as a man. So are you telling me I can now only write exactly who I am? It's like, no, 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 no. We're just saying, as hopefully we do any time we write a book, who does that character need to be for the story? And which character's lens am I best suited to write it through? I was on a panel and we were talking about books set in the Caribbean. So these topics that come up on panels, and one was about writing authentically. And my mysteries are set in Switzerland. I am not personally Swiss. My husband is Swiss. I have lived in Switzerland. However, I could do a lot of research and write about a person who is Swiss, but I chose to make my main character an American who grew up in Switzerland. And that way I could write a little bit more from my perspective as an outsider living there. I could get it a little bit wrong sometimes because that's what outsiders do. They're going to celebrate Thanksgiving, even though they really only celebrated 2 Thanksgivings in America. But I could showcase things about that culture through the lens of myself as an insider, outsider. And so we were talking about, well, what if you're writing a book in the Caribbean? And I'm like, well, I've, not really visited there. And I would be very uncomfortable personally writing from the perspective of a native born Caribbean, citizen. And so I would probably take a similar path. I would say, maybe it's someone who is American who's moved there. Maybe it's a person who's Caucasian that lives there. I think that we can highlight, even though we're writing from something closer to our own point of view, and so I think it's all about just being thoughtful about no one is trying to be prescriptive and say, you can't do this. They're just saying, why are you doing that? Why are you, why is that main character a man? Could it be a woman? You're a woman. I'm like, no, it really needs to be a man because of these reasons. Great, then do that. But make sure you get the man right. I wrote something one time, and my father is a great critic of reading and great editorial eye. It was a tiny detail, but it was kind of a plot point detail. Like the man had a list of things, and my dad said no man would ever have those things on his list. And I'm like, you're right. Like once he said it, he was right. And that's what we're looking for, people to make sure they're getting the feedback. Sometimes, we call it beta readers, but we're calling sensitivity readers. Well, we've always gotten sensitivity readers, so don't make that a big deal. If you're writing a doctor, in your novel, if you're writing about a coroner, if you're writing crime fiction, you're going to get a coroner to weigh in on that. You're going to get a coroner to say, well, a coroner wouldn't exactly do that. Let me tell you something more authentically. And I think that's what we're talking about, authenticity, whether it's race, religion, creed, color, job, whatever. Just get somebody who can help you make your writing better. No one is saying you can't write about a coroner because you're not a coroner, but maybe get them to weigh in. And we're saying, why don't we do this with things about religion? If the character needs to be Jewish, I am not Jewish. I'm going to get someone who's Jewish to read that and say, oh, no, you got, technically that detail's right, but not really in practice. It's not how someone really practicing the faith would do it. So that's something I've thought about a lot over the past year as we take advocacy out there. And sometimes people think, oh, you're trying to tell us to do something. We're just trying to say, make your own writing better by being more aware.
Well, and I would add to that a couple of other things. Secondary characters, or tertiary characters, or other people, make them as diverse as your life, which hopefully is diverse. But make sure that, again, you've done the homework and you have somebody can help you with some lived experience and things like that. Because it matters that those are fully formed characters and that they add to the richness of the world. And we do tend to look at the world through our lens, and it's very hard to get that separated as writers. That's part of your job. But I think there are also some stories that if you're maybe it's not your story to tell. I think that was an elegant way of going about it, of saying, I'm going to do it. I'm an American living in Switzerland, and that's how I'm going to tell this story, because I can tell that story. It's not my story necessarily to tell about a Swiss citizen.
And Swiss is probably close enough to my lived experience that I could get that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But there are many experiences that are too far away for me to understand. And somebody else is going to tell a better story, quite frankly.
Yes.
It's just going to be a better book. And I was thinking, I've had, I grew up in a place, I spent some time in the Deep South with my grandparents, and I've lived in states like in Missouri, which is more of a Midwestern, northern state, whatever. People made fun of my accent or word choices and things like that. So, and so I think when you're talking about populating a book, you want to include the real world, and you want to include what makes it uncomfortable for people, but recognizing that we all do share the same world.
Yes. Yes. And empathy and humanity and, kindness. I mean, these are not terrible things to think about.
At the same time, you got to write a good villain, right? I mean, if we talk crime fiction, you got to write, which means a well-rounded, not generic, flat villain. It's the villain who ideally makes sense, but it's not like I'm just going to pick the generic villain off the shelf, because your book will be richer for it. Hannibal Lecter, I hate to give, Hannibal Lecter is a terrible person. But he was a great fictional character because he was helping someone in the book, but he was also as bad. And so I like when I'm talking to people who are writing books with, real criminals like that, kind of villains, I say, but he's a complex character. He's not just a bad guy. And then the real story, the real villain of the book had to be someone who was doing a crime that was worse than the worst thing. Like, it was a competition of worsts. And so there was a lot of complexity that went into deciding, what would Hannibal Lecter be? And it makes him memorable. Otherwise, he's just a serial killer who's in prison helping an FBI agent.
Yes, that's such a great point. And I think sometimes talking to actors about how they develop characters is helpful in that if they're playing a villain, they understand they understand everything about that character, as part of their
physicality, everything.
But they also understand, that character loves kittens, or there's something human about everybody, which actually makes them more frightening.
That was going to say, the serial killer who loves kittens, that scares me more, because you know that they're capable of hiding in plain sight, or, whatever. It's whatever aspect of that scares you. It makes it feel more real, which is scarier.
Yeah. Yeah. The complexity. So I love the top three. And, we're blessed because the presidents of Sisters in Crime stay on the board for another year to be the immediate past president. Succession planning is something that this organization has always had, and it's super important for any kind of a nonprofit. But just wrapping this up, we have over 50 chapters worldwide. We talk to people. One of the biggest problems chapters have is getting people willing to serve on the board. You've served on many boards. I've served on different boards. Can you tell us why it's valuable? What's valuable? Why do you love board service?
Well, because I've made incredible friendships through board service. Sometimes, really personal level friendships, and sometimes just great collegial friendships. There's a little bit of a difference sometimes. I think when you feel part of something, you learn a lot. And then you also get the good part of feeling like you're giving back, right? I mean, but I do think it's symbiotic. I believe that however much you give, you're going to give back in equal measure. And so I think that having a small, sometimes for me, if I have a small role, it's a great way to say I can be involved. I can give just this amount of time, and I will accomplish that task for the organization. And that has felt good to me at some points in my life where I'm like, oh, I had a big job, a lot of travel, and doing that one thing made me feel connected to something maybe a little bit personal for me or a little bit outside my normal life. And I think that's a great way for people to get involved and say, I can only do this, but I'll do it well, and you feel good about it. And then maybe your time, you're in a different part of your life or your time is a little bit more flexible, and you say, okay, I can take on a larger role. So I just encourage people who feel like they have gotten something from an organization or would like to get something from an organization. You could come to Sisters in Crime and say, I want to learn to write, or I want to be published. And so you get involved. And if you say, I'm going to commit to, for example, we have the online write-ins, which run, I think, 15 times every week and then more times certain months of the year. And you say, I come to those as a new member of Sisters in Crime, and I'm going to join a write-in. I'm going to write for 25 minutes and then 5 minutes of chat and 25 minutes one time a day every week. You think, I've enjoyed these. Can I be a host? I'm going to go to the write-in anyway. All I'm going to do is show up in a slightly different capacity. And so I'm giving back to something that I feel has already been valuable to me. And I think if you approach board service that way, you'll find your path in. It could be a very small thing, which in the end, cumulatively, is great service to a board. And then as you get to know the board a little bit more, you might find that you have a kind of a package of projects. Maybe it's something you'd like them to do differently or better or whatever. You think, well, if I want to be involved, I should volunteer. I've run a lot of things that come out of volunteer boards, and I've run a lot of big charity events. And there would always be people who would come with really good ideas, but there would always be people who came with a kind of aspect of complaint in their voice. And I'm just going to make something up, the napkins shouldn't be read at these kinds of events. And it's such a tiny detail in the midst of a 5-day event that was breakfast through dinner every day. And I would say, oh my gosh, that's a really good point. Why don't you join the board next year and you can be in charge of that? And sometimes people would say, yes, I would like to do that because I believe, and I would say, okay. And sometimes people would say, well, it's really not a big deal, but I find that if you think something about an organization and have ideas, say, I'd like to be involved in understanding the complexity behind the decisions and really providing some new solutions and new answers. I'm going to mention a couple of, you asked me for my top 3 things that I think we had done this year, but I do want to say that the things like Read Like a Writer, which is meant for writers and readers, I think our webinar archive, the library of webinars, is amazing. I think the author search, which is a wonderful way for our members to opt in to say, hey, I'm a writer, or maybe I'm pre-published, but I'm also a coroner, or I'm an author and I write cozies, but I also, am a forensic expert. So that those who are, especially our chapters, but other organizations who are looking for skilled speakers can look through the author search, which is public facing, and dive into some of our great membership skills.
Yeah. Yes. No. There's so much to unpack. I love what you said about board service. I'm also going to say this: don't assume that you're not qualified to be on a board. Please, just if you're interested or you want to get to know people, and many writers are introverts and shy, this is a great way to be part of something. And it may be on a small committee, for a conference, or it may be that you're going to be, an at-large member just filling in different gaps until you figure out what you want to do. But it's don't wait to be asked. Volunteer.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, because you do have something to contribute, because there's so many aspects that go into a successful board, and I guarantee that people have something to contribute. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Tracee de Hahn, you have certainly had something to contribute as we're wrapping up year 6 and moving into year 7 of your board service for Sisters in Crime Worldwide. And we're so grateful for that. Thank you for a great conversation. Thank you for everything you've done for this organization.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure both to be here today and to serve on the Sisters in Crime Worldwide Board.
Thank you for being with us today. Sisters in Crime is about community. We were founded to advocate for women crime writers, and we continue that mission by fighting for equity in the crime writing community. Sisters in Crime is an international, inclusive organization for all who write and love crime fiction, mystery, thrillers, and suspense. Join us at sistersincrime.org and make sure you subscribe to this podcast.